You're listening to Soundside. I'm Libby Denkman. Today, we heard an announcement of a new union deal that could open the door to expanded use of police alternatives. There's also been some positive news on the city budget to the tune of about $14 million in unexpected revenue on the horizon, and a move by the city council recently to approve a new public safety sales tax. All of that as key races for council and city positions are playing out. Seattle Times City Hall reporter David Kroman joins me for more. David, hi, welcome back to the show. And we're going to start with some budget news. So the October forecast suggests the city has over $10 million more in the budget than expected from the summer. As you point out, it's not a huge drop in the budget. The city's general fund is $2 billion. But walk us through what this means for the city.
Yeah, I'd say the significance of this new forecast is not so much the good news it contains, so much as the lack of bad news, because the proposal that came out from Mayor Bruce Harrell was really walked a kind of narrow line. It left very little flexibility for the Seattle City Council to kind of move money around and fund their priorities. And so that put them in a position where if this economic forecast came back and said, you know what, we actually think the economy might not do as well as we had previously said, that would have really put them in a position where they don't have any flexibility but to make cuts. And particularly 2 weeks before an election, no city council person wants to be seen making cuts. And so, yes, there's a little bit more money here, but I think the real significance of it is they do not have to take an axe to this budget.
Yeah. And you've written that although council members campaign perennially on balancing the budget each year, when fall comes around, they have typically had to rely on temporary measures. So raising the jumpstart tax, for example. Each year, there's a lot of fretting about another looming large deficit. Each year, it seems to be the same modus operandi. Any sign of something different this year?
No, I think it's the same approach. And you're right. I mean, a majority of the people in City Hall right now campaign pretty specifically on, however you want to phrase it, audit the budget or, take a fine-tooth comb to the budget, because, it is true that the city's budget is kind of fundamentally out of whack, that the amount of money they're bringing in and the amount of money they have dedicated do not line up. And so every year since basically 2022, since federal COVID dollars started falling away, they have been in a deficit. And so, it's easy when you're on the campaign trail to say, we got to square this up. We got to make cuts. We got to move money around so that we don't have to deal with this every year. But then when you're actually in City Hall, the reality is it becomes a little more tempting to kind of just find Band-Aids in places. And this budget in particular has a lot of Band-Aids. It contains a lot of assumptions around what voters are going to do. It assumes that they're going to approve a rewrite of the city's business tax that will bring in more money. It assumes they will pass an education levy. It assumes that next year departments will not spend all of the money they're given, which is a new approach. And so it is really a Band-Aid together budget. And it is balanced as it's written right now, but it does nothing to fix the problem for next year in 2027's budget when, again, they're going to have to find $140 million to close a gap.
Yeah, I think this might have been your reporting where one of the budget aides at the city said something along the lines of, we've raided all the drawers, to balance past budgets, and now we open them up and all there's to find is twist ties.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's been a tough few years. So one thing that might help with this deficit is this new public safety sales tax that the council passed. It is expected to raise about $40 million next year. And public safety feels like that could be a lot of things. David, what exactly is going to happen with this money? Do we know where it's going to go?
Yeah, like you said, it has to go specifically towards public safety, but the definition of public safety, and this is an authority that's given to the city by the state. The state legislature said cities can do this if they want, but as long as they're spending it on public safety. And so the definition of public safety, the traditional one was police. You hire first responders, but it was expanded to include things like treatment or alternative response. And that's where Mayor Harrell's proposal is going. A lot of it is going to be dedicated towards expanding this care department, which is the new police alternative response department. It's doing a bit of work. About $15 million of this is going towards filling the general fund gap. But a lot of it is also, adding new spending. And that is significant. I think, one city council aide drew the connection between this proposal and an election year. And I think there's some legitimacy to that. Again, this is a mayor who's trying to retain his seat. And so he wants to be shown that he's expanding new programs. And that's what that $40 million does. It's intended to expand the care department and bring some treatment alternatives for people who need it.
I also find it interesting, just, we're going to get to elections in a minute, but a lot of the more progressive candidates this year are talking about finding new revenue sources, more progressive revenue sources, mostly taxing the rich. This is kind of a more classic strategy, adding a little bit to the sales tax in the city for a specific purpose. And it's something that, people like Sarah Nelson, the city council president, has gotten behind, the mayor, who's seen as more of a centrist. But let's put a pin in tax conversation for right now, because there was an announcement this morning about that CARE team of alternatives to police responders. Now, this is something that an issue that you reported on recently, David. So let's first get some background. CARE is something, that's relatively new. It came out of those conversations in 2020 about alternatives to police. These are teams that are supposed to be called right now when there's no obvious sign of violence. They address things like mental health crises. They do wellness checks. Now, going back to your conversation with the CARE chief, they told you that the pilot program that was initiated by the city was going well initially, but then something had changed. So what happened in late 2024, David, that brings us up to today?
Yeah, I'll try to not get too far into the weeds here, but when you're talking about a police response, you are inherently also talking about taking work away from police officers. Because police officers historically have been the one to respond to all of these calls. Now, if you talk to almost any police officer, they will tell you they do not like responding to these calls. Most of them as individuals are happy to not go to these calls. But when you're talking about basically working conditions, the labor union is, of course, going to seize on that as leverage and try and use it to their advantage. And so that is what has been happening over the last 2 years. The Police Officers Guild has basically been saying, these alternative responders are eating into our line of work, and therefore we demand that you sit down at the bargaining table with us. So in the meantime, the temporary agreement has been that these responders can go out there, but they have to do it with police officers, which, if you are somebody who advocated for a true police alternative, kind of defeats the purpose in some ways. And it also set up the scenario where for a while it was working, but then at a certain point, for whatever reason, and there's some speculation that it was a labor action, but I don't know that for sure, police officers started kind of stonewalling these CARE responders. Mm-hmm. They were canceling calls. They were finishing calls without waiting for CARE responders. And within the CARE department, this became an enormous source of frustration because, they're saying, hey, look, we exist to create different solutions than what have been offered before. And if you are not allowing us to get there and interact with these people, we can't provide those kinds of what we think of as longer term solutions. In theory, this announcement that happened this morning should kind of put to rest these conflicts that we're seeing between police officers and CARE responders, because now that this announcement has happened, these CARE responders should be allowed to go out independently of the police officers and therefore sort of cut out any barriers to them actually getting out there and doing their job.
When we moderated a debate earlier this week at KUOW and the mayor, I asked him about this CARE situation and the barriers to expanding it, because he had doubled the number of CARE responders in his new budget. But if police were not participating or making these calls or closing the calls before the CARE responders could happen, that's obviously a huge problem for that expansion. He indicated this agreement was pending, this is going to happen. So it sounds like this is going to pave the way for that expansion. Am I understanding that correctly, David?
Yes, that's right. My understanding is they have had a tentative agreement for some time now. It was just kind of a question of whether or not it could get through the unions process. I take today's announcement to mean that, yes, it did get through the unions process. But it should be pointed out that came at a steep cost. The police officers in Seattle, as of last year, were already the highest paid in the state. And now this gives them another roughly 13% raises. So if you're a new officer in the Seattle Police Department, you could make $120,000 in your first year. That is a lot of money. But that apparently is what the mayor's office thinks it took to get this care agreement hammered out.
Yeah. Okay, so we're going to turn to elections now, and we're going to try something new with you, David. We did a lightning round in our debates the last couple of weeks, and we're going to try that with City Hall reporting lightning round, and that is specifically on these elections that are happening. And everybody has their ballots, hopefully, that arrived in the mail by now, especially Seattle voters who have these council and other city positions to be looking at. So let's start with City Council Position 9, Council President Sarah Nelson versus Dion Foster. Can you give us just a couple lines about the race, why you think it's interesting?
This race is interesting because I think it is the referendum on the Seattle City Council, which is that Sarah Nelson is its president. She represented this wave of kind of more moderate public safety focused council people that took office. And so her failure or success, I think, will kind of be a stand-in for what the general view of the public is toward the Seattle City Council. And according to the primary, that so far is pretty negative.
How about city attorney, the race for Ann Davison to either keep her seat or the challenger Erica Evans to take that position? What is your take on what's interesting about this race?
That, to me, is in some ways a referendum on Trump, because city attorney Ann Davison has run as a Republican before. That is an unheard of thing, to be elected to Seattle to Seattle city government as a Republican. She does not really identify as a Republican now, but she certainly has that baggage. And, I think what she is running up against is any affiliation with the party of President Donald Trump is probably looking pretty toxic. And again, the primary results bore that out.
Okay, mayoral election, Mayor Bruce Harrell versus challenger Katie Wilson. You also moderated a debate with King 5 on this race. What do you find the most interesting about this matchup?
This is, it's sort of trite and perhaps cliche to say, but it is truly a referendum on stability, perceived stability versus change. I think that this has the potential to be a change election. You have one candidate who is saying, I am promising you realistic goals that I believe I can deliver on and stability in a chaotic time. And that's Mayor Bruce Harrell. And then you have another candidate who is saying, I think the city's vision for itself is too narrow. And I think we need to be striving beyond what I may even have answers for right now to get to where we really need to be. And that is Katie Wilson.
I'm breaking the lightning round format in my last question here for you, David, just because I'm curious what your take is on those other city council races that it's, too many to get into right here in the last couple minutes we have. But Alexis Mercedes Rink won a special election last year for that other citywide position, 8 seat. It looks to be cruising against Republican Rachel Savage, who is trying to unseat her, who's a business owner. The other city council race is District 2 in Southeast Seattle, where Adonis Ducksworth and Eddie Lynn emerged from the primary. Will a combination of the Dion Foster-Sarah Nelson outcome and the District 2 outcome, which look to be potentially moving those seats in more progressive directions, would that have any significant impact on the makeup of the council or what kind of policies they end up favoring?
It would, yeah, because, there's the perception that the Seattle City Council is this kind of big moderate block. There is a block within the Seattle City Council of that kind of type, but it isn't unanimous. And if Sarah Nelson loses, then and then if Mark Solomon, who is the current interim representative District 2, is replaced, I think that on paper, it still looks like there is a moderate majority on the Seattle City Council, but I think it's a lot more nuanced than that. And I do think it paves the way for conversations about, say, a capital gains tax. I don't know if you remember, but that did come for a vote early in this term, in this Seattle City Council's term, and it only failed 5-4.
And it was presented by, more of a moderate seeming representative, Kathy Moore. And so
yes, exactly.
Not everybody falls along that progressive moderate line.
Yeah, exactly. And so I do think that that could possibly be the biggest shift, which is a more willingness to talk about different forms of taxation rather than, I think, a lot of the members of the city council, and I would say particularly Council President Sarah Nelson, has been pretty hesitant to have those conversations. And so her leaving, I think, makes a big difference. And then also, there's just the kind of political nature of it too, which is if if voters come back and deliver a pretty clear message that they support people like Dion Foster, like Katie Wilson, like Alexis Mercedes Rink, those are all people who have spoken quite openly and passionately about more taxes on big corporations and rich people. And I think those results, coupled with the social housing tax vote from a while ago, from earlier this year, I think deliver a pretty clear message that is among the more popular voting issues in Seattle. And so even if you are a moderate on Seattle City Council who is skeptical of those things, it's kind of hard. It would be hard to ignore that message coming from voters totally.
Yeah, it's fascinating stuff. And David Kroman covers it with aplomb over at the Seattle Times. City Hall reporter David Kroman, thank you very much and good luck with your Mariners cope going forward.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to Soundside. This show is only possible because listeners support us. If you're able to give right now, please check out the show notes for a link to donate. And don't forget, you can listen live on KUOW 94.9 FM Seattle at noon and 8 p.m., Monday through Thursday, or anytime online at KUOW.org.